Do you remember those strange grocery items from the 1920s? The ones so odd, you almost can't believe people bought them? Back then, those shelves overflowed with wild ideas, strange labels, and foods that promised to change modern life forever. What do these forgotten products say about how much we've really changed? In the 1920s, before anyone truly understood what health supplements should or shouldn't contain, the Violet Ray Health Elixir was all the rage. It came in a small, elegant glass bottle, the kind that made you believe it must hold something miraculous inside. Advertisements promised vitality, vibrance, and vigor, all from a tonic that shimmered faintly purple under the light. People swore by it, claiming a few sips could lift fatigue, cure sadness, and sharpen the mind. Of course, it also contained a surprising blend of alcohol and lithium, ingredients that likely did something, just not what the label promised. Housewives kept it beside the vinegar and flour, and it wasn't unusual to see it sitting right on grocery counters next to olive oil and baking soda. It was part of the decade's obsession with scientific wellness, where every bottle seemed to promise the modern cure for the human condition. Doctors warned that such elixirs did little more than tingle your tongue and lighten your wallet, but that didn't stop people from sipping away. In a time when life felt faster and more uncertain than ever, the Violet Ray's sparkle offered a strange comfort. Looking back, it might have been more placebo than potion, but for many, that violet glow was hope in a bottle. Few names in the 1920s grocery stores carried the familiarity of Lydia E. Pinkham. Her vegetable compound was marketed directly to women, a revolutionary tonic meant to soothe everything from monthly discomfort to the mysterious ailment of female hysteria. Housewives bought it as often as flour or sugar, keeping a bottle tucked discreetly behind the kitchen tins. The advertisements spoke with sympathy, depicting frazzled women transformed into serene homemakers after a few doses. What the fine print didn't mention was that the tonic was loaded with alcohol, almost 20% by volume. For many women of the time, it was one of the only socially acceptable ways to have a quiet drink without raising eyebrows. The sweet, herbal taste masked the burn, and the calming effects felt nearly instant. In an era that didn't often listen to women's pain, Lydia's smiling face on the label became a symbol of understanding, even if the science behind it was questionable at best. Some swore it truly helped, while others just enjoyed the way the world seemed softer afterward. It was the perfect blend of comfort, myth, and marketing. Today, it stands as one of the earliest examples of wellness culture in a bottle, equal parts remedy and rebellion. Before calorie counting and juice cleanses, there were bile beans, a tiny brown pill that promised health, beauty, and a balanced system. Sold in tins that looked more like candy boxes than medicine, they were proudly displayed in grocery stores next to real food. The idea was simple: clear out your insides, and everything else would follow. The ads claimed they made you bright-eyed and slender, two promises no one could resist in the Roaring '20s. People popped them like breath mints, chasing an ideal of youth and lightness that matched the age of flappers and fast cars. The problem was, bile beans were mostly a laxative. Their cleansing effects were immediate and unmistakable, which somehow convinced customers that they must be working. Friends recommended them like beauty secrets, whispering that they kept the complexion clear and the figure trim. Even men bought them by the handful, convinced good digestion was the key to charm. The truth is, these little beans were part of a larger obsession with purification, both inside and out. Everyone wanted to feel clean, modern, and scientifically healthy. Decades later, people still joke that the bile bean worked too well, leaving you lighter in ways no one intended. Imagine a time when vitamins tasted like the sea, and then someone thought candy could fix that. In the 1920s, cod liver oil was the miracle supplement, rich in vitamin D and thought to prevent everything from rickets to gloominess. The problem? The taste was dreadful. So clever candy makers decided to disguise it. Cod liver oil candies hit grocery shelves wrapped in cheerful paper, promising health through sweetness. Parents rejoiced, convinced they'd finally tricked their children into taking medicine willingly. But kids weren't fooled. The moment the sugary coating melted, That unmistakable wave of fishy flavor hit hard. Still, mothers insisted, "It's good for you!" And kids chewed bravely, grimacing through every bite. The candies were a symbol of the 1920s faith and progress, that even the worst-tasting cure could be tamed with a little innovation. Ironically, the oil often lost its potency once mixed with sugar, making them more novelty than nutrition. Yet the memory stuck. Ask anyone who grew up then, and they'll tell you about that one candy that smelled like the docks, but came in a pretty box. Health, it seemed, was something you had to suffer through, one sticky piece at a time. With a name like Swamproot, you might think people would hesitate. But in the 1920s, this bottle was a bestseller. Marketed as a natural tonic for kidney health, it claimed to cleanse the system and restore youthful energy. The label boasted an impressive list of roots, herbs, and vegetable extracts, though most of the healing power came from a generous splash of alcohol. Grocery stores proudly stocked it beside other household essentials, and advertisements described it as medicine for the modern man. People swore it helped with fatigue, back pain, and even melancholy. It was the kind of cure-all that thrived in an era when science and superstition overlapped freely. The name alone gave it credibility. If something came from nature, surely it must be good. Swamproot became part of daily routines, mixed with water, milk, or even poured over ice like a fine tonic. Looking back, it was less medicine and more metaphor, a reflection of how desperate people were for relief from invisible aches. They trusted what felt earthy and honest, even if it came from a bottle labeled swamp. Before it became the comforting bedtime drink we know today, Ovaltine began as a rather suspicious malt extract tonic. In the 1920s, it was advertised as a nutritional miracle for delicate children and tired mothers. The early version was thick, syrupy, and tasted more like molasses medicine than chocolate milk. Families kept bottles of it in their cupboards, dosing children before school in hopes it would build strength and sharpen the mind. It was part of a wave of malt-based health foods that promised vital force to a generation still recovering from the First World War. Mothers believed it could turn picky eaters into hearty ones, and kids tolerated it for the reward of a sweet aftertaste. The ads featured rosy-cheeked children running through fields, supposedly powered by science and malt. What people didn't realize was that early Ovaltine had a fair share of sugar and barely any vitamins. Still, it symbolized hope, modern nutrition in a bottle. Over time, it would evolve into the familiar powder drink, shedding its medicinal image for something cozy. But in the 1920s, Ovaltine was less comfort and more cure, proof that even progress could taste a little strange. Postum was the anti-coffee for a world that couldn't stop drinking it. Invented as a healthier alternative, this caffeine-free beverage made from roasted grains was supposed to calm nerves, aid sleep, and purify the body. Its dark color and rich aroma fooled many at first sip, but the flavor, somewhere between burnt toast and sweet syrup, was unmistakably unique. The 1920s were a decade obsessed with self-control, and Postum fit perfectly into that narrative. Advertisements warned that caffeine led to nervous breakdowns and irritability, convincing families that real coffee was a moral hazard. So, grocery stores stocked Postum by the case, and mornings across America began to smell just a little less exciting. Housewives poured steaming mugs for their husbands, hoping to keep them calm, while children were told it was the smart person's coffee. It became a kind of household virtue, a sign that you cared about your health, even if you secretly missed the kick of caffeine. Looking back, Postum feels like the ultimate symbol of early wellness marketing, a blend of good intentions, questionable taste, and the eternal promise of self-improvement. If you thought breakfast cereal was just for breakfast, the 1920s proved otherwise. Kellogg's Sanitarium. Brand food wasn't just something to eat. It was a lifestyle choice. Marketed by the famed Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, it was described as the food that cleanses. Yes, literally. The cereal promised regular digestion, glowing skin, and moral purity, all from a bowl of bran. It was sold in health shops and grocery stores alike, with boxes printed in clinical-looking fonts that made it feel half doctor's prescription, half breakfast innovation. Dr. Kellogg, known for his obsession with clean living, saw food as medicine, and his followers treated each bite like a spiritual act. Families bought it not for flavor, but for function. It was coarse, dry, and unapologetically dull, but to many, that blandness meant it must be good for you. It reflected the 1920s fascination with purity, of body, diet, and even morality. In a time when indulgence was on the rise, Kellogg's brand was the reminder that virtue could come in the form of fiber. Before face creams and detox drinks, the path to beauty apparently led straight through yeast. In the 1920s, grocery stores sold small blocks of compressed yeast right alongside butter and lard, marketed as the miracle food for clear skin. The logic was simple. Yeast helped bread rise, so maybe it could lift your complexion too. Health magazines swore by it, urging readers to eat a spoonful a day, raw or mixed with milk. The texture was chalky, the taste bitter, but many swore it made them feel lighter, cleaner, somehow newer. Teenagers desperate for a cure to acne took it religiously, while adults praised it for keeping the system young. Doctors were skeptical, but it didn't matter. Yeast became a symbol of early health fanaticism, ugly in form, but beautiful in promise. It spoke to a culture willing to swallow anything if it meant self-improvement. The fad eventually faded, but not before countless people endured spoonfuls of that strange, tangy paste in the name of beauty. If nothing else, it proved that in the 1920s, vanity and wellness were already lifelong partners. Dr. Pierce's favorite prescription was one of the granddaddies of old-fashioned female tonics. Marketed as a cure for delicate conditions, it promised relief from everything a woman could possibly suffer: nerves, faintness, exhaustion, even weakness of spirit. The pink label and fancy script made it look almost elegant, more beauty product than medicine. Behind the charm, however, was a heavy dose of alcohol and opium-derived compounds, the kind that certainly made you feel better, temporarily. It was sold in pharmacies, grocery counters, and general stores, a fixture in nearly every household. Women wrote glowing testimonials in magazines describing how they could once again dance, sew, and smile after just a few spoonfuls. For some, it was the only relief in a world that dismissed their pain as nerves. For others, it became a quiet habit. The tonic blurred the line between medication and escape, something between a remedy and a rebellion against a society that demanded perfection. By the time regulations caught up, Dr. Pierce had already made a fortune, and his favorite prescription had earned its place in history as one of the most infamous cures that cured nothing at all. Bovril was not so much a food as it was an idea. The idea that strength itself could be bottled. Sold in stout little jars with bold lettering, it promised to turn anyone into a picture of health and stamina. The secret? Beef, or rather, the essence of it. This dark, sticky paste could be mixed with hot water to make a drink, spread on toast, or stirred into soup. Advertisements declared it vital for vigor, and 1920s households took that seriously. Mothers spooned it into children's bowls, soldiers swore it gave them power, and athletes were told it would build the blood. The flavor was strong, salty, meaty, and oddly comforting, and the smell could fill a kitchen in seconds. It was part nourishment, part medicine, and entirely a product of its time. To drink Bovril was to believe that health came not from rest, but from fortitude. Doctors debated whether it truly built strength or merely fooled people with its hearty flavor. But in an age that worshipped progress and endurance, a jar of Bovril seemed like science in edible form. It was the original protein boost, long before shakes and powders lined shelves, and it proved one thing: people have always wanted an easy shortcut to feeling powerful. Before cereal became cheerful, it was serious business. Ralston Health cereal wasn't just breakfast, it was a moral commitment. Born from the rational living movement, it promised purity of body and mind through disciplined eating. The man behind it, Webster Edgerly, founded an entire philosophy around self-control, exercise, and what he called ethical nourishment. Boxes of Ralston cereal filled grocery shelves, their austere designs a far cry from the smiling mascots that would later dominate the market. It wasn't about fun, it was about virtue. Families who ate Ralston believed they were participating in something noble, a way of life that demanded restraint and purpose. Even the name Ralston came from an acronym for the movement's principles: regime, activity, light, strength, temperance, oxygen, and nature. It sounded more like a code of conduct than a breakfast recipe. The cereal itself was plain, hearty, and dry, almost aggressively wholesome. But to those who followed the movement, each spoonful symbolized progress. Ralston's philosophy faded as America's appetite for joy grew, but its influence lingered. You can still trace its DNA in every health trend that promises to cleanse or reform. In its own way, Ralston was the first true fitness cereal, one that preached righteousness along with fiber. Before granola bars and protein shakes, there were Horlick's malted milk tablets, tiny, chalky discs that promised a full meal in a bite. The Horlick brothers were geniuses of marketing, convincing the 1920s world that these little tablets held all the nourishment a person needed. Energy for the active life, the ads proclaimed, featuring explorers, soldiers, and schoolchildren all chewing happily on what looked like medicine. The flavor was vaguely sweet, somewhere between warm milk and damp flour, but the promise of convenience outweighed the taste. Sold in small tins, they became a must-have for travelers and mountaineers. Even early aviators carried them on flights, calling them emergency rations. Parents packed them in lunch pails, and students kept them in pockets for mental energy. For many, they represented modern efficiency, nutrition without the fuss. Of course, the science didn't hold up. The tablets barely provided a snack's worth of calories. But in a fast-moving world chasing progress, they felt like the future. Horlicks had tapped into a fantasy that would never die. The dream of nourishment made effortless. Even today, the idea lingers in every meal replacement shake, a legacy of the little milk tablets that once promised to feed the modern age. In the 1920s, before Karo corn syrup became a baker's best friend, it started out in a far stranger role: baby food. Yes, parents were encouraged to mix corn syrup into bottles to help growth and digestion. The golden syrup was cheap, smooth, and sweet, and advertisers sold it as a miracle of modern nutrition. Pure, safe, and nourishing, the label read, though the ingredient list was essentially liquid sugar. Soon, households discovered its real power wasn't in bottles, but in baking. Suddenly, it was in everything: pecan pies, candy, caramel corn, and frosting. It gave desserts that glossy, professional look people loved. Housewives traded recipes clipped from Karo's promotional booklets, which often came free with a bottle. It became the backbone of the decade's obsession with sweetness, a kind of edible optimism. The company cleverly shifted its image from infant care to indulgence, and Karo's reputation rose right alongside America's sweet tooth. What started as baby food became an icon of homemade desserts. And while nutritionists eventually frowned upon it, one thing is certain: no pantry of the 1920s was complete without that sticky golden jar waiting to make life just a little sweeter. Imagine buying oatmeal and finding a teacup inside. In the 1920s, Quaker Oats, Mother's Oats, turned grocery shopping into a treasure hunt. Each box contained a hidden piece of dishware, sometimes a saucer, sometimes a cup, occasionally a small bowl. Families would shake and sift through oats carefully, listening for the clink of porcelain. It was marketing genius. Housewives collected entire sets piece by piece, proudly displaying mismatched china that all began with breakfast. Children begged for oatmeal just to see what prize they might uncover. The idea wasn't just fun, it was practical. Times were still tight, and free dishware meant one less expense for families trying to stretch every dollar. Mother's Oats positioned itself as caring and homely, a brand that understood the heart of the household. Even those who didn't love oatmeal found reasons to buy it because who could resist a surprise at the bottom of the box? It was the original prize inside, long before cereal toys and Cracker Jack trinkets. And for many, those humble little dishes outlasted the memories of the oats themselves, becoming relics of a time when even breakfast came with a bit of wonder. Calumet baking powder was the silent partner in every 1920s kitchen triumph and disaster. Its shiny red and silver tin was instantly recognizable, often sitting proudly on the shelf beside flour and sugar. But what made Calumet truly special wasn't just the powder inside. It was the paper booklet tucked inside each tin, a handful of recipes meant to show off modern baking. Housewives experimented with chocolate puddings, mystery cakes, and towering biscuits, all thanks to those tiny folded leaflets. Some recipes worked beautifully, while others left ovens filled with sticky, smoky chaos. Calumet's slogan, "Double Acting," promised perfect rise and texture, though that wasn't always the case. Still, the brand earned fierce loyalty. The cheerful Native American chief logo became a familiar symbol of trust, printed on countless advertisements that claimed Calumet never failed. In a decade obsessed with progress and homemaking pride, the baking powder felt like science disguised as simplicity. Each tin was both tool and teacher, encouraging creativity in kitchens that once followed rigid traditions. If some cakes fell flat, it didn't matter. Calumet sold not just powder, but the dream of modern mastery, the belief that with the right can, anyone could be a genius baker. Of all the strange grocery items of the 1920s, few were as oddly charming as Dromedary date nut bread in a can. Yes, bread already baked and sealed tight in a tin. All you had to do was open, slice, and serve. It sounded futuristic, a little indulgent, and a little absurd. Advertisements showed housewives on picnics or surprise guests arriving, and suddenly, out came the can of bread, perfectly preserved. The rich, molasses-like scent filled the air as the soft loaf slid out with a satisfying plop. Sweet, nutty, and dense, it was surprisingly delicious. Dromedary promoted it as emergency elegance, the snack that could save a hostess's reputation in seconds. It paired beautifully with cream cheese or jelly, and it didn't spoil quickly, making it ideal for lunch pails and road trips. The name Dromedary gave it an exotic flair, as if it had traveled from some distant desert oasis just to grace your pantry shelf. People loved it for its novelty as much as its taste. Looking back, Dromedary date nut bread feels like a preview of the convenience food craze to come. Proof that even a century ago, Americans adored the idea of food that was ready when they were. In the 1920s, canned food was still something of a marvel, and Campbell's tomato bisque was at the forefront of that revolution. A meal in minutes, the ads promised, and shoppers weren't quite sure what to make of it. The idea of condensed soup, thick, concentrated, and waiting for water, felt both modern and suspicious. Housewives raised eyebrows but bought it anyway, curious about this strange new convenience. The rich red label soon became a fixture in pantries, and the taste, creamy, tangy, and slightly metallic, became comfort in a can. Families loved how quickly it transformed into dinner, especially on cold nights when fresh ingredients were scarce. Critics called it lazy cooking, but to busy homemakers, it was liberation. It also reflected the 1920s fascination with progress, the belief that science could simplify everything, even soup. Campbell's tomato bisque was more than food, it was a statement. It said you embraced the future, where a warm meal didn't require an afternoon of chopping and stirring. For better or worse, it changed the rhythm of the kitchen forever, one red and white can at a time. Before Grandma's molasses became synonymous with gingerbread and cookies, it was sold as a cure. In the 1920s, it was proudly labeled a stomach soother, the kind of homespun tonic families swore by for everything from indigestion to fatigue. A spoonful after meals was supposed to settle the system and purify the blood. It was thick, dark, and sweet, with a flavor halfway between candy and medicine. Mothers kept bottles near the stove, doling it out with the same care they used for cough syrup. The brand's kindly grandmother logo made it feel trustworthy. Who could question a remedy made by Grandma herself? The idea wasn't entirely wrong. Molasses does contain iron and minerals, though not enough to justify the hype. Still, for families wary of strange bottled tonics, Grandma's felt honest. It straddled the line between food and folk medicine, comforting and curative all at once. By the decade's end, people realized it was far better in cakes than in spoons, and the brand leaned into its sweeter identity. Yet that early reputation lingered. In every sticky jar and every batch of cookies, you could still taste a bit of its medicinal past, a sweet reminder that healing once came by the tablespoon. There was a time when drinking chocolate wasn't about comfort. It was about strength. Baker's breakfast cocoa was marketed as a sustaining meal, a health drink fit for workers, students, and even invalids. In an era obsessed with energy and efficiency, cocoa seemed like the perfect answer. It was rich, portable, and powered by the magic word, pure. Ads showed healthy families smiling over steaming cups, claiming cocoa built bone and brain. The message was clear. This wasn't dessert. It was daily fuel. Housewives mixed it with milk for children, workers carried it in thermoses, and doctors even recommended it for recovery. The brand leaned on its history, calling itself the oldest and most trusted cocoa, which made it feel both nostalgic and modern. The truth, of course, was that Baker's was simply good cocoa, but clever marketing transformed it into a symbol of vitality. The irony is that its richness, once considered strength, is now considered indulgence. But for the 1920s, when progress was measured in energy and optimism, a cup of Baker's breakfast cocoa was the taste of modern life itself, strong, sweet, and a little bit idealistic. Pompeian olive oil in the 1920s was more than a pantry staple. It was a lifestyle. The deep green bottle stood proudly on kitchen shelves, its label promising purity, health, and a hint of Mediterranean glamour. Housewives poured it over salads, fried with it, and then, as the ad suggested, rubbed it into their hair and skin for radiance. In an age obsessed with both efficiency and elegance, Pompeian blurred the line between nourishment and self-care. Women claimed it softened hands roughened by washing and kept complexions youthful and luminous. The same oil that seasoned dinner was rubbed on elbows and brushed through curls. It was the ultimate symbol of the 1920s modern woman. Practical yet glamorous, thrifty yet indulgent. She didn't need a vanity table full of potions when one bottle from the grocer could do it all. Critics laughed at the idea of using cooking oil as beauty cream, but the charm of Pompeian olive oil was undeniable. Whether it truly improved beauty or just sold the dream of it hardly mattered. What mattered was that it made women feel radiant while dinner simmered on the stove. Certo fruit pectin might sound like a harmless jam ingredient today, but in the 1920s it was part of a much stranger story. Yes, it thickened preserves, but early ads also promoted it as a miracle cleanser for the body. Housewives who bought it for canning soon found magazines encouraging them to take a spoonful in water each morning for vitality and regularity. Bottles lined grocery aisles beside flour and sugar, bridging the gap between dessert and detox. The same jar that helped you make grape jelly also promised to brighten your complexion and renew your energy. Women swore it smoothed their skin, cured sluggishness, and kept them light and lively. To them, it wasn't strange at all that something for jam could also make them glow. It felt like nature's secret, bottled and ready. Of course, science never backed the claims, but in an age when wellness meant simplicity, Certo felt safe. No harsh chemicals, no frightening tonics, just fruit. Looking back, the notion seems quaint, but it reveals a truth about the 1920s mindset. Health wasn't only about feeling good. It was about control, about holding time still in a world moving too fast. In the 1920s, Welch's grape juice was more than a drink. It was a statement of virtue. During Prohibition, when alcohol vanished from legal shelves, Americans turned to this sweet purple substitute to fill the gap. Its makers promised it was the drink of purity, a beverage for respectable families who didn't need liquor to celebrate. Bottled in elegant glass and poured into wine-like goblets, it offered a sense of sophistication without sin. The company leaned into the temperance movement, marketing itself as the national drink of good citizens. Housewives served it chilled at garden parties. Preachers toasted it at weddings. The irony, of course, was that people drank it in precisely the same rituals once reserved for wine. It mimicked everything about drinking except the intoxication, the pouring, the clinking, the quiet satisfaction. In that way, Welch's became a symbol of America's attempt to have virtue without sacrifice. Some mocked it as grape soda for the self-righteous, but most simply enjoyed its syrupy sweetness. In every purple pour, you could taste a country trying to behave. There was a time when even syrup came with a sense of whimsy. In the 1920s, log cabin syrup wasn't just maple-flavored sweetness, it was nostalgia in tin form. The container itself was the attraction, a shiny metal jug molded to look like a miniature log cabin, complete with tiny windows and a peaked roof. Families adored it. Children begged to keep the empty tins as dollhouses or piggy banks, and mothers lined them along windowsills as makeshift decor. Of course, the design wasn't exactly practical. The spout dripped, the lid stuck, and the corners trapped sticky syrup like amber glue. Opening a log cabin tin felt like opening a memory. The smell of maple, the gleam of polished metal, the cozy illusion of simpler times. It was advertising genius wrapped in Americana, and families fell for it with joy. Even the name carried warmth, conjuring visions of frontier breakfasts and wood smoke mornings. In an age of urban growth and rapid change, that little tin cabin stood as a reminder of home, solid, sweet, and stubbornly sentimental. In the 1920s, one bottle sat quietly in nearly every home, Dr. Caldwell's syrup pepsin. Its label promised gentle relief for digestive irregularities, but most people simply knew it as the cure for everything that ailed your stomach. The taste? Sweet enough that children never complained about taking it, and that was the point. Parents swore it kept the family regular, a polite way of saying it doubled as a laxative. Grocery clerks kept bottles right by the counter, knowing every mother would grab one just in case. The secret to its popularity was trust. It was gentle enough for babies, sweet enough for kids, and convincing enough for adults who didn't want harsh tonics. In a decade obsessed with health and vitality, syrup pepsin felt wholesome, even comforting. Of course, behind that syrupy sweetness was a hefty dose of senna, a natural laxative that guaranteed results. Yet few complained. It wasn't just about digestion, it was about reassurance, the belief that a spoonful of something sweet could keep your world running smoothly. Powdered gelatin desserts in odd flavors became another strange feature of the wartime pantry. While fruit-flavored gelatin had long been popular, the 1940s introduced savory flavors like tomato, celery, or even chicken. These powders were marketed as creative ways to stretch meals, turning leftovers into molded salads or aspics. Government pamphlets even included recipes for gelatin meat salads, showing off peas, carrots, and even hot dogs floating in wobbly shapes. Magazines praised them as thrifty, modern, and attractive, though many families quietly dreaded serving them. Children in particular were baffled, expecting dessert but finding vegetables inside. Homemakers were encouraged to suspend vegetables, meat scraps, or even fish inside jiggling blocks of gelatin, creating bizarre dishes that baffled children and guests alike. The idea was efficiency, nothing wasted, everything served. Cookbooks filled with recipes for salads that combined gelatin with mayonnaise, peas, and carrots, insisting they were both nutritious and elegant. In truth, they were strange, often unappetizing, and today they are remembered mostly as culinary curiosities. Few recipes from this gelatin craze survived beyond the wartime years, but the memory of tomato-flavored gelatin lingers as one of the oddest items ever sold in grocery stores. Evaporated milk used to be a poor man's secret weapon. It sat right there next to the condensed stuff, in a small metal can with a price tag you barely noticed. You kept a few in the cupboard for emergencies. or baking, or when there was no fresh milk in the fridge and the store was too far or too expensive. Back then, a can cost less than a candy bar. Today, you might be better off just buying real milk. It was used in coffee, poured over cereal, and stirred into mashed potatoes, and somehow it worked. You could stretch it with water or use it full strength when you needed extra creaminess. It was cheap comfort, quiet, overlooked, and always there when the fridge let you down. Now it sits on the shelf with a price tag that makes you double-check if you grabbed the wrong brand. That can, that once cost less than 50 cents, is flirting with $2 in some stores. It is not flashy, it is not trendy. But for people who grew up on it, evaporated milk still holds a place in the pantry and in the budget, even if it pinches now. This one was straight up ridiculous, in the best way possible. A miniature pool table, complete with Nerf cue sticks, soft balls, and felt surface. It was like a toy, a game, and furniture all rolled into one. But you needed space. A lot of it. You could not just throw this on the floor and start playing. It took over the basement or a rec room, which meant the kid who had one also had a basement or a rec room. These sets were not cheap either. They came in big boxes and assembling them took time. But when they were set up, they were the crown jewel of the playroom. They were not built for bedrooms or cramped living rooms. They were built for homes with finished basements and quiet carpeted spaces where parents let you leave stuff out. You knew a kid had money when they had rooms dedicated to fun. You could hear the balls clack gently as rich kids lined up their shots like little pros. They wore smug grins while you tried to figure out how to hold the Nerf stick without snapping it. And the worst part? They were not even that into it. They would play a few rounds, get bored, and move on. Meanwhile, you were over there dreaming of owning one for real. Because in a world where everything felt temporary, a pool table, even a Nerf one, felt like luxury you could keep. Plain white rice pudding cups were the quiet dessert no one bragged about, but everyone seemed to eat. They came chilled, sealed with foil, and tasted like soft, sweetened memory. They were thick, creamy, and filled with tiny grains of rice that reminded you food did not have to be loud to be good. It was the kind of dessert that made you sit down, take a spoon, and actually pay attention. The cinnamon on top, when it was there, added just enough to make it feel like something made with care. You never asked for rice pudding, but when it was there, you always ate it. Some came from the store in those little 4-packs wrapped in cardboard. Others came from home, made from leftover rice and sweetened milk, poured into Tupperware. It was humble, but it was honest. And it reminded you that dessert did not have to be perfect, it just had to be present. It filled the space between meals with warmth. It closed the night on a soft note. Rice pudding cups did not sparkle. But in the 1970s, they delivered comfort without trying too hard. And sometimes that was exactly what we needed. If any of this reminded you of what used to sit on your shelf, or what still might, share your favorite memory in the comments, tap like if it brought you back, and subscribe so we can keep unpacking the past together. There was no freedom quite like a bike in the 1970s. No schedule, no helmet, just you and your rusted 10-speed flying down the sidewalk like you had somewhere to be. You did not. That was the point. You pedaled to the store for gum, to your friend's house just to hang. You rode in packs, racing down hills, throwing your hands in the air like Evel Knievel. Nobody tracked your location. Your parents did not panic if you disappeared for a few hours. "Be home by dark," they said. So you kept one eye on the sun, one on the road, and hoped you made it back before the streetlights flickered on. It was pure, unsupervised childhood. Scraped knees, popped tires, cardboard in the spokes to make it sound like a motorcycle. Sometimes your bike broke down and you just walked it the rest of the way, talking about everything and nothing with whoever stuck by you. It was never about the destination. It was about how far you could go before someone called you home. You were not just riding a bike. You were becoming your own person. Every block was yours to conquer. Every shortcut became a story. In the 1970s, your bike was your first taste of independence, and maybe your last for a while. and as the sun dipped low and you coasted into the driveway, you felt bigger than you were. That kind of freedom, you never really forget it. Cabbage and potatoes by the sack were the backbone of poor family meals. Sold in bulk for cheap, they could be stretched into soups, stews, or fried up for dinner. Bags of potatoes sat in cool basements, while cabbage heads lingered in the fridge for weeks without spoiling. Every meal seemed to find a way to use them, boiled, mashed, fried, or shredded into coleslaw. Kids groaned when cabbage smell filled the house, but parents knew it was hearty, filling, and nutritious. Sometimes it was all you had, but it was enough to keep everyone going. In winter especially, potatoes and cabbage carried families through when money was thin. They were humble, unglamorous foods, but they held a place of honor in poor households. Every poor kid in the 1970s remembered those giant sacks, knowing dinner would almost always include one or both. Victory Coffee Substitute was a bitter reminder of shortages made from roasted chicory root, barley, or other grains. Real coffee beans were scarce, and Americans had to accept that their morning cup would not taste the same. Grocery shelves stocked jars of this substitute, advertised as rich and satisfying, though few agreed. Some ads even claimed it was healthier than coffee, boasting that it was easy on the nerves and ideal for families. Homemakers were encouraged to brew it proudly, as though drinking it was a patriotic duty. For many, it became less about taste and more about keeping up a comforting ritual. Many said it tasted burnt or earthy, with none of the warmth that real coffee provided. Still, it gave people something hot to drink, and the ritual mattered more than the taste. Families drank it with milk or sweetened it with precious sugar to mask the bitterness. Some soldiers overseas grew used to it and drank it even after the war, but most abandoned it the moment real coffee returned. Victory coffee substitutes were strange, unwelcome, and unforgettable, tied forever to the sacrifices of the 1940s. Margarine in a tub was the cheaper answer to butter, and for a long time it stayed in its lane. It spread easily, kept forever in the fridge, and came in tubs big enough to last all month. You could bake with it, fry eggs in it, melt it over vegetables, or slather it onto toast. Some people swore by it. Others just could not afford anything else. Either way, it got the job done. For years, you could get a whole tub for under $1. Now that same tub is pushing $3, and if you go for a buttery spread or something with olive oil, forget it. You are still getting oil and flavoring, but paying like it is whipped gold. The ingredients have not changed, but the price sure has. The basic brands that once saved you money are now neck and neck with store-brand butter, and that makes it harder to justify. For a while, margarine felt like a recession-proof staple, something you could count on in lean times. But today, it feels like you are being charged more for settling. It still lives in fridges across America, but now it comes with a side of frustration. When even margarine feels expensive, you start to wonder what cheap even means anymore. It was not just a toy. It was a whole world, scaled down to fit on the carpet. The Fisher-Price Play family house came with a folding design that clicked open like a suitcase full of stories. You had the little plastic people, the tiny blue car, the staircase that doubled as a carrying handle, and of course, the garage. That little garage door rolled up and down with a satisfying snap, like you were living in miniature suburbia. And that is exactly what it was. The dream of a cozy home, shrunk down for small hands and big imaginations. But make no mistake, this set was premium. It was more than just the house. There were versions that came with extra cars, furniture, pets, even a plastic fence to circle the yard. And each one cost a little more. Rich kids had the full lineup. Their playroom was like a neighborhood. You would visit and see a fire station, a schoolhouse, and the house with the garage, all perfectly arranged. You wanted to dive in, but it always felt like you were borrowing someone else's world. The Play family house was about more than pretend. It was about stability, warmth, and a sense that everything had its place. The beds were always made. The fridge was always full. There were no broken windows or peeling paint. You did not just play house. You imagined what it felt like to live in one that never ran out of light. Store-brand peanut butter crackers were the kind of snack that showed up when lunch was still a few hours away. They came in little plastic sleeves, bright orange crackers, sandwiching a thin layer of slightly sweet, slightly salty peanut butter. You could buy a box of 6-packs for under $1, and they lasted all week if you were careful. They were crumbly, dry, and left peanut butter in the corners of your mouth. But you never said no to them. They were the treat tucked into a lunchbox when cookies were out of reach. You ate them slow, one bite at a time, trying to make them last, or you scarfed them down fast because hunger had no patience. Some broke in the package. Some were perfect, but everyone counted. They were the in-between snack that got you through school days, grocery trips, or waiting for dinner to be done. You never thought of them as luxury, but looking back, they were one of the most dependable little things in your pantry. Peanut butter crackers did not make a meal, but they gave you just enough to keep going. Bologna ends from the deli were the mystery meat of childhood in poor households. At the end of the slicer's work, when the big log of bologna was too short to fit properly, the store sold the leftover ends at a discount. Families lined up for them, taking home bags of odd-shaped chunks. They were fried in a skillet, stacked between bread, or diced into casseroles. Sometimes the slices were thick and uneven, curling up in the pan like little cups of grease. Other times they were mashed into sandwiches with mustard, a meal that felt like a feast even though it cost pennies. Kids complained, but they ate every bite because meat was meat and bologna was king in a poor kitchen. Families stretched those ends as far as they could, using every scrap in lunches and dinners. It was cheap, salty, and filling, which was all that mattered. Today, it might seem funny, but for kids in the 1970s, the taste of fried bologna ends was unforgettable. Soy Victory sausage was one of the strangest meats to line shelves during the 1940s. With real meat in short supply, companies blended soy flour, fillers, and scraps into sausages that were meant to stretch rations further. These sausages often looked the part, but once cooked, they revealed their odd texture and flavor. Many described them as rubbery or bland, but they were cheap and filling, and that mattered more than taste. The government promoted them as patriotic, urging families to embrace soy as a way to help win the war. Cookbooks included recipes that added onions, breadcrumbs, or herbs to improve the flavor. Families learned to slice them into casseroles or stews where the strangeness could be hidden. For many, it was their first real exposure to soy as food, and it stuck in memory as both peculiar and necessary. Soy sausages never became a beloved staple, but they were a symbol of sacrifice at the dinner table. Hot dogs in bulk packs were never glamorous, but they were survival food. A 10-pack could stretch across multiple meals, especially if you had buns or just bread. You boiled them, grilled them, nuked them. Kids ate them cold out of the fridge, and they used to be cheap, really cheap. Now even basic hot dogs have seen a price jump. Some packs are nearing $6, and the bigger family sizes do not save much anymore. And if you want anything fancier than the pink tube kind, be ready to fork over almost 10. Hot dogs were supposed to be recession-proof, that thing you could always afford. Toss a pack in the cart, dinner was done. Now they are joining bacon in the "is it worth it" category. For better or worse, even hot dogs are starting to feel like a treat. Boxed gelatin mix, store brand, no frills, was the dessert you made when there was not enough for anything else. It cost pennies, took only water, and could sit in the fridge for days without going bad. Red, orange, lime green, it all tasted mostly the same. But that did not matter. It was cold, wiggly, sweet, and strangely satisfying. You poured it into mismatched bowls, let it set, and waited for that first satisfying spoonful. It was something you could offer guests and still feel like a good host. It filled space at birthday parties, potlucks, and school lunches. You could stretch it with canned fruit or whipped topping, turn it into a salad if you wanted to get fancy, or just eat it straight. Sometimes you made it just because you needed to feel like something was under control. It set slowly in the fridge, and for a few hours, you had something to look forward to. Gelatin mix did not impress anyone, but it held its place. Colorful, sweet, and just enough to count as dessert. Coffee cans for storing flour or sugar were a sight you could find on any kitchen counter. Once the last spoonful of Maxwell House or Folgers was brewed, the metal can was scrubbed clean and filled with dry goods. The plastic snap-on lid kept everything fresh enough, and the can itself was nearly indestructible. Poor families stacked them on shelves, labeled with masking tape and marker to tell sugar from flour, rice, or cornmeal. No matter how many times they were washed, they always carried that lingering coffee smell, which sometimes flavored the flour if it sat too long. But nobody minded. It was thrift in action, and that mattered more than taste. Kids grew up recognizing the sound of those plastic lids popping open as part of the rhythm of cooking at home. They doubled as storage for nails, screws, crayons, or buttons, making them as much workshop and craft supplies as kitchenware. Lined up in neat rows, they became a badge of pride, practical, reused, and full of possibility. Buying new canisters was out of the question when every household already had a pile of coffee cans ready to go. Dehydrated soup bricks were another strange but practical item from wartime grocery stores. These compressed cubes or rectangles contained dried vegetables, bouillon, and grains, ready to be boiled into soup. They were promoted as a miracle of convenience. Just drop one into water and dinner was served. Some even came with patriotic names like Victory Soup, promising both comfort and efficiency. Community cookbooks suggested adding scraps of onion, potatoes, or cabbage to make the broth heartier. For many families, these bricks became a way to turn almost nothing into something that could feed a crowd. The texture and taste were far from gourmet, but families welcomed the ease. They often added scraps of meat, potatoes, or garden vegetables to bulk up the meal. Children remembered the bricks dissolving into murky broth with an odd smell, but it was warm and filling. For soldiers and civilians alike, they became a familiar staple. Today we have instant soup powders and packaged mixes, but the old bricks feel almost medieval. They were practical, strange, and a symbol of a world learning to stretch every resource. Store-brand American cheese singles were the cheapest cheese you could buy. Plastic-wrapped slices that melted like magic and turned any sandwich into comfort food. You used them on grilled cheese, cheeseburgers, or even scrambled eggs if you were in a mood. You used to get 20 slices for under $2. Now the same pack costs over $4 and feels thinner than ever. It tears when you peel it, it sweats when it is warm. But you still buy it because it makes the food feel like home. You stand in the aisle comparing slices, wondering if it is worth going generic again. Spoiler: even the generics are not cheap anymore. Cheese singles used to be filler food. Now they are another reason your grocery total feels like rent. Lunch was supposed to be a break, but in the 1970s it was also a fashion show. And the kids who had designer lunchboxes, metal ones with full-color prints of superheroes, cartoons, or pop icons, walked into the cafeteria like royalty. Marvel Comics, Star Wars, The Bionic Woman, Dukes of Hazzard, whatever was hot at the time, it showed up in metal form with a matching thermos inside. Some kids just had paper bags or plain boxes with names written in marker. But the rich kids, they had style. They had that satisfying metal clack when the lid snapped shut. They had clean interiors, never rusted or dented. The thermos always fit perfectly in the lid ring, no leaks, no broken caps. Their sandwiches came out looking like magazine ads. Meanwhile, your soggy peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper was probably mashed under an apple and a warm juice box. Even opening their lunchbox was a moment. It flipped open to reveal perfect compartments, sometimes with notes from mom or shiny napkins that looked brand new. That lunchbox said more about their life than any report card could. It said, "We shop at the big store. We care about presentation. We do not reuse bags until they rip." You were eating the same food, sure, but somehow it always tasted different when it came out of a bag that used to hold groceries. Canned applesauce was dessert, side dish, and lunchbox filler all in one. It came in big cans, small cans, even plastic cups toward the end of the decade. It was smooth, sweet, and slightly tangy, and always better cold. You served it with pork chops, spooned it into bowls, or spread it on toast. Sometimes it was cinnamon-flavored, sometimes plain, but always familiar. It was fruit that required no peeling, no chewing, and no mess. You stirred it before serving because the water always rose to the top. It came out in a soft plop and sat in the bowl like a scoop of mashed fruit. It cooled your tongue after hot meals and added sweetness to otherwise dull plates. Sometimes it was the only thing on the plate that felt like dessert. You never got excited about it, but you always finished it. Kids loved it. Adults used it. It was dependable. Canned applesauce was one of those foods that never tried to do too much, but always gave just enough. Glass peanut butter jars reused as cups were another trademark of poor family kitchens. Brands like Skippy and Jif often sold their spreads in heavy glass containers that doubled as drinking glasses once emptied. Mothers washed them out carefully, peeled off the labels, and suddenly you had a set of sturdy cups. Kool-Aid, sweet tea, or plain tap water tasted just as good out of a peanut butter jar as it did out of any fancy glassware. Some jars even came with printed designs, cartoon characters, or logos that made them more fun than anything store-bought. Kids claimed their favorites, and God help you if a sibling drank out of your peanut butter glass. They rattled in dish racks, thick enough to survive endless drops, and often outlived real glasses that broke in a year. Families never wasted money on drinkware when they were essentially handed out for free at the grocery store. They were heavy, practical, and often mismatched, but that was part of their charm. Guests drank from them without complaint because everyone had them, and everyone understood. In poor households of the 1970s, those jars were proof that nothing useful ever went to waste. Canned horse meat stew was one of the most controversial and strange protein sources of the 1940s. Beef was in short supply, but horses were plentiful, and some companies began quietly selling canned horse meat as stew. For many, the very idea was unsettling, but wartime hunger softened resistance. Ads framed it as a noble choice, with slogans like, "Every bite helps the fight," trying to make eating horse feel patriotic. In some areas, butchers openly sold horse cuts, though they were labeled carefully to avoid scaring buyers. Those who ate it often avoided telling neighbors, embarrassed by the stigma. Ads promoted it as affordable, hearty, and patriotic, encouraging families to see it as just another type of meat. In truth, it was stringy, tough, and carried a flavor most Americans did not embrace. Yet in some areas, especially on the West Coast, canned horse meat found a market. Families who tried it rarely admitted it, but the tins sold steadily enough to be remembered. Once the war ended and beef returned to shelves, horse meat vanished almost overnight. It remains one of the strangest chapters in American grocery history. Cream of mushroom soup used to be the unsung hero of 1,000 casseroles. It was not something you ate on its own, but it was the base of every budget recipe your mom made from a church cookbook. You poured it into green beans, poured it over rice, or mixed it into tuna noodles and called it dinner. Back then, it was under $1, always. Now, closer to $2, and that is if you are lucky. Some stores price it like it is homemade French bisque. You used to toss 3 or 4 into the cart without thinking. Now you scan the shelf and hope for a 2-for-1 deal. And it is not just mushroom, cream of chicken, celery, broccoli. They are all climbing like they forgot who they were feeding. For generations, these soups were budget stretchers. They glued together ingredients that had no business being called a meal. But now they are part of the problem. Casseroles just got more expensive. They were kits, but they felt like blueprints for the future. Those Radio Shack electronics kits came with tiny wires, bulbs, resistors, batteries, and a little booklet full of instructions that read like a spy manual. You could make radios, alarms, light sensors, even a lie detector if you wired it right. But it was not just about the builds. It was about who got to build them. These kits were not cheap. You needed a parent who would drive you to a Radio Shack, who would pay for something educational and expensive, and who trusted you not to burn the house down. Rich kids got those kits for Christmas, then spent winter break building circuits in their bedrooms. They had the table space, they had the batteries, they had the confidence. Most of us were still figuring out how to hook up a flashlight bulb without it shorting out. These kits made you feel like an inventor. They sparked ideas you did not even know you had. But more than anything, they whispered a message. You are smart enough to make something work. Unless, of course, you never had the chance to try. That is what stuck, not the blinking light or the faint sound of static from a crystal radio. It was the thought that maybe, with the right wires and a little help, you could have done something amazing too. From strange tonics to syrup-filled cabins, the 1920s grocery aisle was full of surprises. So tell us which one fascinated you most in the comments. Give this video a like if you love rediscovering the past, and subscribe so we can keep unboxing history together.